All right, I think we are going to start off and hope for the best. I want to say thank you again for joining us. Let me introduce myself and welcome everyone for joining us here. My name is Megan Lee Erickson. I am the Vice President of Member Services here at the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. And happy early Friday cold morning. Thanks again for tuning in today. This is the last of 3 events that have been pre-session for our series, our public policy program, the Legislative Breakfast Series. So we had one for the West Metro suburbs, we had one for the city of Bloomington, and now today we will be conversing with a couple of folks from the city of Minneapolis about their priorities ahead of the session. A couple of housekeeping notes just for you all to be aware of before we get started here today. You'll notice that all of your audio and video has been muted for this webinar. If you would like to ask any questions of our guests here today, please submit your questions for consideration under the Q&A function at the bottom of your toolbar. We'll be monitoring that throughout our time here today. Also want to make sure that everyone knows that this webinar is being recorded, and post-event you will receive a link to view the recording in your post-event email. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors. We appreciate their support. Our presenting sponsor is Comcast. They cannot be there today, but want to make sure everyone knows that Comcast is a media and technology company whose mission is to create incredible technology and entertainment that connects millions of people to the moments and experiences that matter most. Thank you again, Comcast, for your support. We have some other folks we need to thank as well. Our supporting sponsors, CenterPoint Energy, Mortenson, and Excel Energy. Our contributing sponsors, Timberwolves and Minnesota Timberwolves and Minnesota Lynx, thank you. MRA, the management company, Target, and US Bank. And finally, our media sponsor for this series is Finance and Commerce. Thank you again to all of our sponsors for your investment into our programming and for your support of this series in particular. Today, we have a great lineup for you featuring some of our folks here from the Twin Cities, and I am going to introduce and hand it over to our moderator, Grace Waltz. She is the Vice President of Public Policy, who can let us know if she's heard anything from our other representatives and where we are at here today. And we'll get started. I'll pass it over to you, Grace. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Megan. Yes, we're joined by Representative Mohammed Noor right now, and I just got word that Representative Hornstein should be logging on any moment now. So I think we can safely go ahead and get started, since I was actually planning on starting with Representative Mohammed Noor anyway. So thanks again to our panelists and all of our attendees for joining us today. I obviously wish we could be doing these events in person, but I will admit that I was relieved to not have to get in my cold car at 7 a.m. this morning. Like Megan said, this is our 3rd and final legislative preview this morning. We're so grateful to all the legislators that have participated in these panels, and hope all of you have found value in hearing from your elected representatives as you and your businesses are preparing for the legislative session. As we've found, 1 hour is never enough for these types of conversations, but we will try to get through as many topics as we can. We're hoping this will be as interactive as possible given the virtual format. So like Megan said, put any questions you have in the Q&A function, and we will try to answer them throughout the event if they match up with what we're discussing. Otherwise, we'll get to them as we get closer to the end of the event. So we will kick things off by introducing our panel. I will give each of them a minute to share their thoughts and lay the groundwork for some of the topics we'll be discussing today. Anything from our giant surplus, redistricting, a bonding bill, housing, pandemic, public safety. We'll get to as many as we can. So we'll start with Representative Mohammed Noor, who represents District 60B, so covering that east side of Minneapolis. So welcome, Representative Noor.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Thanks for the introduction, Grace. I'm honored to be with you and also with my colleague here, Representative Hornstein. Good to see you virtually. That's the new normal that we have. My name is Mohammed Noor. I represent District 60B. That's the district in Minneapolis, surrounding all the neighborhoods of University of Minnesota, including the U of M in Minneapolis. I'm also the chair for Workforce and Business Development. I serve on Ways and Means. I also serve in health, human services, and also in higher education. We are here today because of the several challenges that we're facing. And I'll be discussing more about the historic moment that we're in, once in a lifetime opportunity that we have, the structural projected balance or surplus that we will have, but also some of the other resources that we have as a state. But we have to be honest to one another. COVID-19 pandemic has significantly changed the way we do business, the way we run our everyday life. As a father of 4 young children, the struggles for families are real. As we go in and out of the school, the mental health issues for our kids, the loss of learning for our kids, so many other challenges that teachers are facing, the shortages that we're seeing, and the burnt out healthcare workers, those are real challenges. Those are emergencies that we have to be addressing as we go forward. I know many people will be thinking about providing large-scale tax cuts is the right way to go. I'll caution you. There are a lot of priorities. There are a lot of situations that we need to be coming to the table. I know you have so many questions about the UI, about the COVID-19, and so much more about the workforce issues. And I look forward to having that conversation with you all today. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Representative Noor. And now I will turn it to Representative Hornstein, who represents District 61A, so more that west side of Minneapolis. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Grace. I really appreciate this invitation, and at least to see and be with all of you virtually, hoping that in the near future we'll be able to be together. I echo what my wonderful colleague, Representative Noor, has said about the stakes in this coming legislative session. We do have a historic opportunity, not only with the surplus, but with the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed late last year in Washington. Minnesota will receive a hefty multi-billion dollar, $6.8 billion infusion of capital for infrastructure. And so it is incumbent on us, and that we have big focus in the Transportation Committee, to make sure that we can put that money to work and put it to work quickly. We are going to have to make sure that we utilize the surplus and other state resources so that we can access and match those federal monies that have been provided to us. We can't leave federal money on the table. And we have so many opportunities, and it really relates a lot to the work that Representative Noor does in his committee, because we know that jobs and good wages are a key to economic recovery. And we get the best bang for our buck when we invest in infrastructure. And this is something that I know the Minneapolis Chamber has been well aware of over the years. I have deeply appreciated your advocacy on transportation, and particularly public transit at the state capitol. And we had bipartisan success last session. I'm very proud of the work that our caucus was able to do with the Senate, myself and Senator Newman, and we accomplished a lot in our bill, including 2 new bus rapid transit lines, funding for 2 new bus rapid transit lines that will connect downtown to the south side and parts of northeast Minneapolis, and going up into the northern suburbs. These are investments that we know work. When other transit systems were in decline and continue to struggle with ridership in the midst of our ongoing pandemic, arterial bus rapid transit and the local bus services maintained their ridership, or at least the declines were quite modest. So we know that this form of transportation works. It is such an upgrade. It really modernizes our system. And one of the things that we'll be focusing on with the surplus money are additional arterial bus rapid transit lines that will really be important for our region, including a line that will connect Minneapolis to St. Paul via a northern route along Como Avenue. So I look forward to our discussion today with much appreciation to all of your work, and particularly your support of public transit in the Minnesota legislature.
Thank you both so much. You've both been incredible partners to the Chamber, so we're really appreciative that you're both here today. And I just got word Senator Deepsik should be joining us any second, so I think I'll keep moving with the questions, and then we'll circle back when she's able to join us. But obviously, the biggest headline heading into the session that you both touched on is this eye-popping $7.7 billion surplus. It's one of those numbers I had to do a double take and zoom in on my screen to see if I was actually reading it correctly. And even more incredible when you think about 2 years ago at the start of 2020, we had the $1.5 billion surplus, which obviously quickly became a pretty significant deficit due to the pandemic. So you both touched on this a little bit in your opening statements, but I'd love to kind of expand and hear more of your thoughts on how you think we should be spending this money. There's any number of issues that we could solve for. Representative Noor, you mentioned the UI fund. There are obviously almost certainly business owners listening in today who got that letter resetting their UI rates to help pay for that federal debt. And we saw yesterday that Governor Walz included enough funding to repay that debt and replenish the trust fund in his supplemental budget. There's childcare, there's affordable housing, frontline worker bonuses. And of course, we have those federal dollars that Representative Hornstein touched on as well. So maybe Representative Noor, will circle back to you. Love to hear your thoughts on what kind of priorities you're thinking about over the next few months.
Thank you again. I think it's incumbent upon us to look into what does this projected surplus mean to all of us. We all know that we have so many priorities that are coming, and I've already stated the main priorities is to invest in the people of Minnesota. The workers, the infrastructure that Representative Hornstein has already elaborated on, and to be able to address the needs of those families who are struggling today. And one of the key issues that we're looking into is how do we provide individuals and families to take care of their loved ones, or when they have a newborn baby. We're proposing to invest in paid family medical leave. In fact, we're proposing to pay for the first 2 years for the employers and the employees so they don't have to contribute to the newly developed program that we intend to do. The paid family medical leave is overdue and past due. It's one of the key elements that we want to be able to fund immediately and to be able to provide to every individual in the state of Minnesota. And if you do have a great program, you will certainly keep your program for your employees. But we need to invest in making sure that individuals can recover from the pandemic. We have to be able to provide individuals the need that they have when it comes to workforce training, to skill them, reskill them, and to be able to give them new opportunities to have a sustainable family wage. We know that the surplus in the infrastructure and the additional resource we have from the ARPA funds will help us create those opportunities, give individuals the trade skills, give individuals experiences that they can have a long-term sustainable need. And let's not forget, this is the city where George Floyd, a Black man, was murdered in the city of Minneapolis. The awakening on the issues of racial justice, the inequities that exist that many people would like to close their eyes and say it will just go away, it will never go away. The issues of homelessness, we must and we should invest in housing, starting from homeless issue to transition housing, to affordable housing, to home ownership. When you look at the data, the white community in Minneapolis, more than 80% in the state of Minnesota, let's look at the general number, 80% own their own homes. Less than 20% of the Black community own homes. Those are stark inequities that exist from the education to housing and all those things. If we say that we're not going to make the right investment at the right time, then we are not doing the right things that are necessary for us to thrive. I'm not going to commit to $2.743 billion to the UI Trust Fund. We're not there yet. We still need to have the conversation. The frontline workers issue have not yet been addressed. That should have been done a long time ago. The agreement that was done was never resolved. So what I'm telling you today is let's invest in the people of Minnesota. Paid family medical leave, seek and save time, affordable housing, the infrastructure. Let's build the future opportunities for all Minnesotans. And that's how we will spend the surplus and the additional funding. This was not supposed to be a budget year. It was supposed to be a policy year. But we also have a lot of things that are going to come in a short period of time. I'm hoping that we can all come together to be able to make sense of where we are, the opportunity that we have so that we don't squander. It's time for us to act. It's time for us to make big, bold, and transformative investment in workforce and business development at the same time.
Thank you so much. I think now we'll welcome Senator Dietzich. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'll give you a moment just to introduce yourself and share any opening comments you would like to, and then I'll have you jump into our first question, which is just about this giant budget surplus. I imagine you have lots of thoughts about how we could spend this money, though, as Representative Noor says, we're technically not in a budget year. So I guess the question is as well, do we spend all this money? Do we save some of it on that bottom line? And just would love to hear some of your priorities. I imagine a lot of your focus will be on affordable housing. So welcome.
Thank you, and I apologize everybody for being late. I had multiple technical issues this morning, which happens in this Zoom world. Sometimes it makes it easier to just get up and grab a cup of coffee and go to another room and get on Zoom, and when that doesn't work, you know, crises appear. So sorry about that. Yes, my name is Carrie Dietzich, and I have the honor and privilege to represent Senate District 60, which includes Northeast and Southeast Minneapolis, as I call East Minneapolis. And then I have both the West Bank and East Bank of the Minneapolis campus for the University of Minnesota. And then on the West Bank there have Cedar Riverside with Representative Noor, and Seward with Representative Noor, Augsburg campus. It's a great area. You can eat your way around the world in our district. It has been traditionally the home of many immigrants, and it continues today. So that's kind of describes my area. I'm on the housing, and I'm on lead on housing, and I'm on the tax committee. So as Grace said, I do spend a lot of time focusing on housing and how do we improve housing all across the state of Minnesota. I've heard from many business owners throughout the last few years and cities across the state that their housing shortages is real. The housing crisis is real. It's not just a Minneapolis issue. And we've now read some stories. They've been saying it before, but now there's stories in newspapers on how the housing crunch is actually impacting economies in local cities across the state, because businesses have jobs, but they can't get workers because there's no place to live. And so it's affecting the economy. So I think we should be looking at what do we do to resolve that issue. I also hear from companies that they're having a hard time hiring people. So I think we do need to look at how do we increase that flow, and what do we need to do to make sure that our workers are highly educated, starting in middle school, high school. It's been a traumatic few years for all of us, but for those students, it's really been, as they're going back to school, there's a lot of anxiety because they haven't had that social interaction with students and with their peers for the last few years. So how do we help those students going forward? Housing, again, it will be a big issue of mine. Housing and stable housing increases in educational outcomes and health outcomes. And so it's not just a housing issue, it is an economic issue. So that's kind of what I'm working on. And on the question of the surplus, I don't actually call it a surplus. I've been around, will be my 10th session. And so I've kind of seen the ups and downs, and having worked in local government prior to that, I know that surplus and that November surplus can disappear or dramatically change by February. So I like to call it a positive budgetary balance. We do have $3 billion in the bank, and I think that's huge. So what do we do with that? And then kind of wait till the February forecast to see what other monies are there. I know it's trending that we're still getting money in, but I don't know the impact, and I don't think we know the impact of what the ARPA funds did to our budget and how that changes once those funds dry up. So I think we need to be cognizant of that fact, that the forecast can change between November and February. But again, I think from where I sit on housing and taxes, I think we will be looking at some tax issues. I think we'll be looking at, we clearly need to look at housing issues and workforce issues, and how do we help? It helps companies but it also helps families and it helps our local communities if we can truly figure out how to resolve some of those issues.
Thank you so much. And Representative Horstein, to Senator Dietzig's point, kind of regardless of what happens if that surplus number changes, you mentioned this in your opening statement, but we still have an extraordinary amount of money when it comes to infrastructure, thanks to the federal bill. And I know we've talked about this with you, we've talked about this with our members, we've thought a lot about how the way that we think about and use transit has changed so dramatically over the last 2 years. We hear a lot from folks who have returned to the office who are having a hard time finding reliable transportation given the service reductions that have had to be made. At the same time, we also hear from folks who are still working from home. So transit is less about getting to and from work, but they're more interested in being able to use it to move about their everyday lives, whether it's running errands or going to the doctor or going out to dinner. And it's obviously been hard to ignore the pretty devastating impacts of climate change over the last year. And we know that transit plays a major role in a cleaner future. So I'm sure you could spend a full hour on just this topic alone. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and then welcome any other priorities you would like to share.
Well, thank you. I thought you framed that up quite nicely. And I want to emphasize, and I thought that Representative Noor did such a great job of really talking about, that all of these issues we deal with ultimately are about people. And I think you mentioned that too, Ms. Walls, just that we're talking about, it's not just bricks and mortar when we talk about infrastructure. And so I think it's very instructive that in the 2020 bonding bill, we had money for 2 lines, the B and the D line, the bus lines, for arterial bus rapid transit. The B line goes down Lake Street. I think that this transit corridor is going to be key to the revitalization of Lake Street. I think that my good friend Russ Adams is on the line with the Lake Street Council, and he knows how important this is for the broader work of the recovery of our city. The D line goes, one of the proposed stops is 38th in Chicago. And so it's no coincidence that that goes through the heart of a community that is in recovery and in great need of mobility. So people can get around, whether it's shopping for groceries or getting to jobs. And the final thing I just want to emphasize too, when we talk about infrastructure, it's not, again, simply transportation. We have an education infrastructure. We have housing infrastructure. One of my daughters just received her master's in education. She is starting her first year of teaching at Justice Page Middle School, which is an amazing thing, and I'm so proud of her. But I say, how are things going, Naomi? She goes, I'm exhausted. And all of the veteran teachers are saying, what a year to go into your first year of teaching in middle school. And so I have always felt that education is absolutely key to addressing the disparities in education and making sure that we have workforce programs and development in place. It is no coincidence that when President Biden came to Minnesota, again, late last year, I think it was the first week of December he came, he chose Dakota Technical College for his speech about the infrastructure bill, because we can't get that infrastructure built without good paying jobs that folks have an opportunity to prepare for, through our technical colleges, through our universities. And so all of these issues relate. So it's not just the bricks and mortar of these individual bus rapid transit lines, it's the much broader issue of infrastructure, which I think we have to include education and housing when we talk about infrastructure. But I think that the issue of adding these additional arterial bus lines, which we know work, ensuring that people can get around safely as pedestrians, electric vehicle infrastructure is going to be very important for us. $68 million is coming to the state of Minnesota. And as you pointed out, Ms. Walls, climate is an absolute existential issue for us. We have a role to play here in our city in addressing the climate crisis. Transit, bike walk, electric vehicles, these are keys to reducing greenhouse gases in the transportation sector.
Thank you. And please extend our thanks to your daughter as well for getting into the education field. We need more teachers. And fun fact, I played hockey with Naomi, his daughter, many years ago. So fun to hear what she's up to. Shifting gears a little bit, public safety continues to be one of, if not the top issue on people's minds. When we surveyed our membership at the end of 2021, 87% of respondents had this as their top issue. And I think one of the biggest differences we're seeing from last session, and this is even just a change in the last few months, is this is no longer just a Minneapolis and St. Paul issue. We're seeing carjackings and break-ins in our suburban communities as well. And we obviously saw a lot of work on justice reform last year and in the last several years, but there seems to be increasing concern about violent crime and what we can do to mitigate that, particularly given that increasingly we're seeing more and more of these offenders be quite young, some of them as young as 12, 13 years old. So I won't call on anyone in particular. I'll just open the floor to anyone who wants to share their thoughts on this topic.
So first of all, I want to say that I think it is in some way ironic that these carjackings have been going on in Minneapolis, and there have been other crime issues in Minneapolis that kind of tend to just got focused on Minneapolis when they were happening in the suburbs before. It wasn't until they were high profile in the suburbs before that some people took note. So this has never been just a Minneapolis issue. What I'm going to be working on, because as I mentioned earlier, I hear from business owners that they need they need employers. And if you go backwards and look at who, what are the employees of the future, so that the employers say they need employees. And if you go back and look at who are future employees, and these crimes are being done by younger and younger people, from my perspective, I think we need to keep them busy. We need to keep them entertained. I don't say entertained, but we need to keep them active and engaged. And so let's go back, and I'm working on a bill. I had Learn to Earn bills many years. The Park Board does some programs in Minneapolis where it puts kids to work, and there's an educational component to that. So I think we should partner with Minneapolis School Board and say, who are some of those high-risk kids? And let's put them to work and put them in an educational program over the summer where they get paid and keep them busy. They can be a learning opportunity. We give them a job. They can learn about financial literacy. They can maybe get caught up to in school. I think it's a long range plan, but I think in the short term, it also helps keep those kids busy so they aren't roaming the streets. I know I did many CDBG grant jobs that just kept us busy in the summer. And so it's not quite the same, several years later, but if we keep those kids busy and engaged, maybe during that Learn to Earn program, they find something that really interests them and engages them, that then they, find a focus for going forward. And so I think going upstream, I'm really looking at what do we do to help those kids and keep them busy and help them keep them prepared and in school and prepared to be a good worker in the future.
Thank you, Senator Dietzig, for pointing that. Unfortunately, 1 a.m. This morning, I was at the scene of triple shooting in our district. One person died, 2 were injured. That should not be the reality for all of us. And sometimes we think safety happens in a vacuum. It does not. It requires us to look into the root cause of all those challenges. When we can't invest by providing even a recreational center for the kids, when we feel that is not needed, when we divest and not invest in neighborhoods that are struggling, when we don't provide the tools that the individuals who can tackle this issue, it's not only about the police. Minneapolis is going to struggle for a while because we know that we need more law enforcement officers, but there's going to be a shortage. So it's upon us to look into this issue as a comprehensive perspective. Safety beyond policing. I think the city by itself cannot solve this issue. It has to be a collaborative effort. The city, the county, the state, everyone should be at the table. This is a crisis that we have ignored because it's somebody else's problem. And then some people to politicize the issue of safety is unacceptable. This is not about politics. It's about the lives of the individuals. I've just talked about a young person who lost his life. We could have prevented that if we were doing the right things in the right way. And I can tell you that if we have those who are going to be intervening before things start falling apart, we can address that safety. It's more about environmental. It's about collaboration. It's about coordination. It's about stepping up. This is a moment of leadership and legislation that addresses the root causes of the challenges that we're having across the state. It's not only about Minneapolis. Even in greater Minnesota, they still face those challenges. Substance use disorder. When people are also struggling with their lives, they need that help. Many individuals cannot even put a roof over their head. They cannot put food on the table. They are on the streets as a homeless individuals. We got to take care of one another. If we cannot do that, then we're not solving the root causes of some of the challenges that we face. As I stated earlier on, we have to have those courageous conversations in order to address the challenges that we're facing today. On top of a pandemic, we have got multiple crises that we have to solve at the same time.
Representative Hornstein, anything you want to add?
I would completely concur with what my colleagues have said. And this is a key and very, very critical and urgent issue for the city. I've had constituents just, in the last month who have told me harrowing stories about experiences that they have had in and around the area I represent. So this is a critical issue at all levels of government, and there's not one simple answer. The city has a responsibility, the county and the state. And so in terms of the state, one of the thing that I think we should be focusing on are a couple of pieces of legislation that I'm following that colleagues on the Public Safety Committee are proposing and will introduce very shortly. Representative Frazier, who is the vice chair of the Public Safety Committee, is going to be introducing, I believe, either today or on Monday. We have a pre-filing day, so people can get a sense of what some of the bills are, ahead of time before the session starts. He has a very comprehensive public safety approach that he's taking. He is allocating resources for law enforcement, particularly in investigations. What we found is that there's short staffing, as Representative Noor had mentioned, but particularly with investigations. Community-based policing is one of the pieces of his legislation, as well as civilian review, beefing that up. So, we can support law enforcement, but also do the important accountability work as well. And I think he's taking this very comprehensive approach. Secondly, Representative Edelson, my colleague from across France Avenue in Edina, has really focused in on, as you mentioned, Ms. Walls, that so many of the carjackings have been committed by very young people. I mean, we're talking about 12, 13, 14-year-olds. And so she's uncovered, I think, some deficiencies in our juvenile diversion programs and systems, both how they're operated, how they're funded. And I'm very interested in that work. She shared it with me. She's in the process of drafting bills. So I think if you're interested in, I think, a comprehensive approach to this issue, not just the sloganeering that Representative Noor had mentioned, which is very, very divisive and does not solve the problem and does not bring communities together to collaborate to deal with this issue that, again, is multifaceted, has many levels of jurisdictional responsibility. We're focused on the state, and look at Representative Frazier's legislation and take a look at what Representative Edelson is going to be putting forward on the juvenile diversion system. I think these are really thoughtful and comprehensive approaches that really deserve to be heard and acted on in this legislative session.
Thank you all so much for those comments. And I think, for better or for worse, I think over the last several weeks, we've been seeing people are starting to realize that this is an issue, like you've all said, that we have to address comprehensively as a region and as a state, and it has to be a multi-pronged approach. I just want to remind folks, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A function, and we'll start getting to those as well. So sticking with issues that have to be addressed with a multi-pronged approach, we've entered year 3 of the pandemic, which is kind of hard to believe some days. Obviously, the Omicron variant has thrown a massive wrench in our quest to get back to some semblance of what life looked like pre-pandemic. And there are signs pointing to a potential peak sometime in the next week. But it's fair to say there's really no business or household, I think, that has somehow escaped unaffected by all of this. And one of the things that we're hearing time and time again as the #1 barrier to people being able to return to work is a lack of childcare. And this is one of those issues that impacts the entire state, and sometimes in different ways. Like, I think if you think about rural Minnesota, it tends to be more of an access issue. There just aren't as many providers that are able to stay open. And when we think about the metro area, you tend to have more options, but rarely are they affordable, and they often come with years-long waiting lists. So Senator Dietzich, maybe I'll start with you, just because I know you're highly focused on what can we be doing to get those workers back. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
I agree. It'll take a multi-pronged approach. I think we do need to look at it from several levels. And how do we help? Just basically, how do we help people, and what can we do to make sure that there is access? So it's kind of, in some ways, that simple. What do we need to do? Literally break it down and find out, how do we increase access?
Representative Nora, any thoughts you'd like to share on this topic?
As I serve on human services, I know we are almost at the peak. You know, we've been told that we're going to be at the peak in this month of the Omicron variant. But then the question is, what is next? We have seen Omicron. Before that, it was Delta. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can put the pandemic behind us, but it's going to take a lot of us trying to do the right things to recover from this pandemic. Whether you're a small business owner, whether you're a large business owner, it has impacted all of us. And I think we should thank all the individuals who have been at the upfront in addressing, requesting the testing from the federal government, where you can get for testing shipped to your home. When you need it, quick testing, you can utilize the state programs that exist out there. When you need vaccinations, in fact, we are #1 in many categories when you look at the vaccine numbers, but we're still struggling in some areas, particularly when it comes to communities that have been impacted the most by COVID-19 pandemic. That issue needs to be looked into. When you look at the data, you will see that especially young children from BIPOC communities have not been utilizing the vaccination. That's a problem. We need to be looking from the equitable distribution of the vaccines, but we also need to be addressing the needs for testing, and also to be able to find pathways for us to really encourage our friends, our neighbors, so that we can avoid the COVID-19 pandemic and hopefully put this behind us.
Thank you. Representative Hornstein.
Well, I'm so glad you raised this, because, this unprecedented, once in a century health crisis persists. And, I was reflecting on this the other day, that I believe it was March 16th, 2020 was the last day that we met as a legislature, all of us in person on the House floor. And we were already practicing social distancing at that time. And we were there to pass a very first emergency COVID bill, among many emergency bills that would follow after that. And, I was thinking, we thought, oh, this is going to be done in a few weeks or a month or two. We're going to be, again, I think it's on or around March 16th will now be the second anniversary of this, move, the upending of our society. And, this pandemic over these now almost 2 years has just exposed all of these racial and economic disparities that have not been addressed up until the pandemic and continue to not be addressed, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in housing, whether it's in education, criminal justice, the environment. You know, we have got to get a hold of that problem because it has just exposed it. And we can't go back, as people are always saying, well, let's just go back to the way it was. We want life to be normal again. Well, life wasn't really normal before the pandemic for so many people. And so if there's one thing we can do, you know, with our, and I like the way Senator Dietzig, you put it, it's not a surplus, it's I think you said it's sort of a temporary help, economic boon, or whatever. What was it, Senator Dietzig, that you called it? I loved that, what you said.
Positive budgetary balance.
Budget. Okay, so we have a positive budgetary balance. And so that positive budgetary balance, you had mentioned, Ms. Waltz, childcare, that is one of many, many things that, again, has been exposed, our deficiencies. And so coming out of this pandemic, we have, if we've learned anything at all, it's that we have got to make the investments necessary to bridge these really widening disparities in our communities. And, you know, again, we start with childcare and education, infrastructure and health, particularly the racial disparities that are so much on display here.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we slowly start coming up on time, one topic that I want to make sure we cover, just because we've been talking about it a lot in these events, is redistricting. So the legislature has until February 14th to agree on new political maps. The last 50 years would indicate that's not going to happen. So it will likely be decided by the Supreme Court, which that process is already underway with the 5-judge panel hearing arguments. And we've seen both caucuses release those proposed maps. We had the conversation with our West Metro legislative preview last week, and a lot of those districts are seeing a little bit of a squeeze, considering the population growth that they've had in contrast with the lack of population growth in more rural communities. Minneapolis obviously saw pretty significant growth, though this area has traditionally been pretty safely Democratic, and that seems unlikely to change. But that all said, would love to get your perspective on what you think we could expect from these maps in the long run, given these shifts, and how it will or won't affect the districts you represent. And Representative Noor, maybe I'll start with you, since I know part of your district saw some of the most dramatic growth. I believe the Mercy Homes area saw, I think, a 50% increase.
I believe my district got the highest growth in the entire state, maybe slight difference than a little bit from downtown. That means my district will have to shrink by 10,000 compared to where we are today. But we'll continue to look into this. I'm hopeful. You know, we are legislators. We produced the House committee that addresses the redistricting. They produced their maps, and I know the Senate did. We've got work to do. We've got until February 15th, but I can assure you that we plan to pass redistricting bill as soon as possible, but also knowing that there are some challenges through that process. Grace, you eloquently spoke about those issues. So we have to be able to find ways to collaborate on issues that can be solved through legislative process. And this is a good example of where we're sometimes divided because of gerrymandering and other things that people may want to favor one or the other way of redistricting. But it's upon us to make sure that we can get it done on time and to be able to come to a conference and listen to constituents and the people of Minnesota as we deliberate on this important issue.
And Senator Dietzig, maybe I'll give it to you, since I know that that growth happened in your district as well.
I would say 98% of the growth, 98% of the growth was in Representative Noor's district. That's 10,000 people that we have to lose. And it's, all around the riverfront. People just want to come and live around the riverfront. And in that area, there's, so much happening there. It's exciting to see. That being said, having that many more constituents, 10,000 more constituents and some of my colleagues, it is challenging based on the number of emails we get. So I think it'll be good to balance it out. I think when we look at what the Minnesota Senate looks like, I think even though the courts have done the redistricting, I think they've done a good job in a balance, because I think it shows there's not gerrymandering in our state, because we're 33, 34. So we're very close. We might be for 35, 36 right now with 2 independents, but it shows that it's close. It shows that, we aren't tampering with it right now. We are taking it seriously. We are doing it. I think from Minneapolis perspective, we will, my district and then Senator Champion's district also has to lose 10,000. We're the top 2 in the state. So that shows the growth in Minneapolis. And so we will increase another House district in Minneapolis, depending on what the maps look like. But we will have additional representation. And I think that's good because I think that having Minneapolis as an economic engine in this state and having more people there sharing Minneapolis's stories, you get a lot of, the news kind of likes to highlight the sexy and the drama, but there's a lot of just good going on in Minneapolis right now where, people are helping their neighbors. People are working hard to make this city a better place to live. And there still is a lot going on, even with the pandemic. There still are a lot of great restaurants, and how do we keep them open? And how do we keep it as a thriving city? So I think having another voice at the Capitol will be helpful as we go forward.
And Representative Hornstein, it's made me laugh through all of the 3 events that we've done to see kind of the 50-50 split with legislators, whether they believe that the legislature can get a map done or whether they won't. So what's your thought on that?
Well, thank you. I think, we'll give it a college try here, but I think it's more likely that it'll be a court-drawn map. And Senator Dietzig is right. I mean, we have a good opportunity here. It's likely we don't. Again, it's so difficult to predict what will happen. Minneapolis lost the seat last time in the House. I think we're going to gain. It's likely we're going to gain that back. It's very difficult to predict these things because, again, this is a judicial panel. But what's important to know is that there are criteria for drawing maps that. Again, the likely outcome, in my view, is it'll be a judge-drawn map. They have to follow criteria around keeping BIPOC communities together. That's really important, and it'll be very important for Minneapolis to not dilute those voices in BIPOC communities. Secondly, another criteria that's important for us is that communities of interest, I think that's how they call it, need to stay together. So it also means that the city as a whole should stay together. Now, there's a current district now that has a little part of Richfield in it. There's probably going to be a district that has some neighboring suburb partly in it, but it's going to be so important to keep Minneapolis together. And not divided up. So I think as long as we can keep communities of interest together, keep the city of Minneapolis together, I'm hopeful that our political representation will be fair and that Minneapolis will have an additional voice in the legislature.
Thank you. So we got a question in the chat here from Russ Adams. We've touched on this a little bit. So several community corridors in Minneapolis experienced unprecedented damage and destruction during the civil unrest of 2020. Businesses owned by persons of color were particularly devastated along Lake Street, where the cost of reconstruction has been estimated at over $250 million. So the question is, how will the 2022 legislature respond to the tremendous needs along these vital corridors? This is obviously something that we at the chamber talked a lot with all 3 of you on the screen, as well as others throughout last session. And I saw Representative Noor come off mute right away. So I'll kick it to him because I know he was a champion of this issue last session.
Well, I appreciate the work that the chamber did on this. I think without their leadership, we could not have put forward the $80 million that we put forward for the redevelopment, which we were trying to target mostly the business that were impacted. The first round of 40 million was released. 20 million went to the corridors of Lake Street and Broadway. We are hoping that the funds will go out as soon as possible. The second round of the other $40 million was released by deed. So the RFP for eligible partners will be able to apply and to make sure that we have enough resources. But that's not enough. We know that, but we're looking for the data. Ross, I look forward to having that conversation. I know multiple times we've talked about it. We want to make sure that we close the gaps that exist. There are many business owners, particularly BIPOC business owners, who have been impacted. I do still remember that giving that resource directly to Minneapolis was considered as a bailout. And many folks were really, really against it, saying that you cannot use money to bail out Minneapolis. That's the shame on folks who are trying to create that division. We should have taken care of those businesses as soon as the emergency, the incidents, the uprising that happened in the city of Minneapolis during the civil unrest. We could have taken care of those families and individuals. Still, we're lagging behind in timelines. We need to be looking into finding long-term solutions, not only for those areas that have been impacted, but also looking closely in areas that we can close the opportunities of redevelopment. I'm going to be putting forward some few bills to address some of the criteria to help finance the bridge gap for few small projects, but also looking forward to finding additional resources for the business that have been impacted during the civil unrest in Minneapolis.
Thank you. And I think just with the couple minutes we have left, I want to get to one. We'll treat it as kind of a rapid fire question. But obviously this year is also a bonding year. Earlier this week, Governor Walz released his bonding proposal. We'll wait to see what the caucuses release as well. So I think we'll just go around the horn. If there's I'll give you all a minute if there is a particular project in your district that you would like to plug, and then if there are any closing thoughts that you'd like to share as well. So Representative Hornstein, we can start with you.
Well, I just want to make sure that equity is part and parcel of the bonding proposal, as well as projects that address the climate crisis. And I know that Representative Lee, who is Chairman Lee, who is a Minneapolis legislator, is very, very concerned and tuned in to both of those issues, particularly the equity piece. So if we're going to address disparities, it needs to be addressed in the bonding bill, and that will be beneficial to Minneapolis.
Thank you. Senator Dietzich?
I agree with what Representative Hornstein said. I think we do need to use this as an opportunity to reduce some disparities. As a representative of the U of Minnesota, I also need to do a shout out to them, because I think we do need to fund them. It helps with students. It helps, it's an investment in our future workforce. And so I also want to do a shout out to all they are doing, and also push for their projects.
Thank you. And we'll finish with Representative Noor.
I've been dreaming of a $3 billion, and we can do it. Sometimes we tend to look at a smaller amount, but if we are able to do a $3 billion, and we need to be investing in housing, as my colleagues have already stated that, we also need to be investing in transportation. We need to be addressing the challenges of climate change. This is the opportunity to do that. Some of the projects that Senator Kerry Dietzich, which are also in my district, the University of Minnesota, I look forward to making sure that we help the U of M. At the same time, there are other needs surrounding the area, including the rebuilding of a new center, the Brian Coyle Center, which we may be able to find other resources, but it has to be done this time. When we do have an opportunity like this, we cannot leave anyone behind. So thank you so much for having us. Looking forward to hearing from all of you. Please reach out to us at any moment you're able to.
Thank you. And as I anticipated, these are never long enough. I know there are some questions that we didn't get to, but we'll be sure to share contact information for the legislators on this panel in your post-event email. I'm so grateful to all of you for your time. And I of the belief that it's never easy to be an elected official. And I think there's arguably never been a harder time to be an elected official. So thank you all for your service and for all you do for our communities. And with that, I will pass it over to Megan.
Great. Thank you again, everybody, for being here with us today. If you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to direct them to the chamber. As I mentioned earlier, you will be receiving a post-event email with a link to this recording. Also, I believe we will include the contact information for our representatives and senator joining us today on the call. And if you are interested in checking out any of the other two sessions that we held, pre-session sessions that we held with our Bloomington community or West Metro community, you can also find that on our YouTube page. But as mentioned, you will get a link to this recording after this event later today. Want to share a couple of upcoming events that we have at the Chamber, especially if you are into this public policy world. Next Thursday, we are hosting with the St. Paul Area Chamber annual, we're back in person, hybrid, of course, to be safe, breakfast with the mayors, with Mayor Carter of St. Paul and Mayor Fry of Minneapolis. So would love to see you there. There are still some seats available. Coming up on February 11th in the city of Bloomington, we'll be having a little Chamber Town Talk about the Expo 2027. The theme for that, if you haven't heard, is Healthy People, Healthy Planet. So would love to see you there. And of course, our annual meeting of the Chamber, which is really designed to be very engaging and fun. We will be outlining all of our strategic initiatives for the upcoming year. And that's coming up on Wednesday, February 23rd. That will be a hybrid event, and the in-person portion will be held in Minneapolis at the Fillmore. So would love to see you there. Also want to make sure that I am thanking all of our sponsors for being great supporters of this series of this event. So thank you again to Comcast, to Centerpoint Energy, Mortenson, Excel Energy, Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx, MRA, the Management Association, Target, US Bank, and Finance and Commerce. Thank you all again so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care and be well. Thank you.